Hello creators. Today I have a breakdown of my track The Operator for you. Let me first of all give you a demo listen of what it sounds like. This is the intro. Then the first full section. Heading into the breakdown. Breakdown. Then the build up. The drop. And then once again another full loop. The only sound generating engine I used was the operator. I didn't use any samples and other synthesizers, so I had to synthesize the drums, the lead, the pad, the kick, everything. Then I asked myself, what kind of a theme, what kind of a style do I want my track to be? So it sounds like a modular system kind of. And how I did this was by using modulation, so cross modulation by LFOs and stuff like that, which basically ever evolves the texture and the theme of the song. It's a really unsteady, not settling sound, basically, was the goal here. Now I'm going to break the track down into its sections. Here I did the kick, and the kick is comprised of two sections. We have the body and the head. For the body, it's the operator, of course. Basically, 3 oscillators playing parallel, one getting modulated by a sine wave, this noise. So we have a square and another square and a noise oscillator. One by one, we get the body and a little bit of this high stuff. Just adding some grit, some texture. Then on the FX, some amp, drum bass with reduced transients so it doesn't hit as hard. It's just a little bit too much. And some wood, this gives it more low end. A corpus. Without it, it sounds really high and shallow. It makes the hugest difference. And this one gives it this low ending thump. Then I EQ'd it some, pulled out some resonating frequencies, low cut at 30, and took out these really resonant, high, noisy stuff to just have this texture but not as prominent. And now getting into the head, this is the second layer, just some noise, gives it a little bit of texture, didn't do too much processing here, some reverb, just the highs, not the lows. This is just for texture, doesn't do much. Then we have the bass line in the low frequency group, and in the bass line it's like kind of this siney sound. It's composed of 2 parallel playing operators. One of them gives this the low end, this one, as you can hear. The other one adds some mid bass. And this kind of distorted, uneasy stuff. It's 3 on the top stuff. It's basically 3 oscillators frequency modulating the last one, which is the sine wave. We have all sine waves modulating this one. Then on here it's basically just a sine wave and another sine wave because it's just used for the bass, so we just want this low end. Yeah. Then what you can see going on here is the frequency modulation changes over time, because these two levels of the oscillators that frequency modulate this one that actually outputs the sound are getting modulated by these two LFOs, which one is set on random and the other on a sine with a lot of jitter. So the sound becomes ever evolving. For the processing on the dry, I put some amp. Without it, it sounds shallow. Then some saturation, some EQ, picking out some frequencies that interfere with the kick. Then a compressor to sidechain it to the body of the kick. Without it, we would get an interference in the low end. You don't want that. So the low end together, kick and bass, sounds like that. So let's move on to the toms. Gonna be quick here. Right, they're playing offbeat every 4 beats. Basically sounds similar to a kick. Did take the similar approach. Here you can see all of these oscillators frequency modulating one. If I take them off, sounds like that. And with them, gives some more, some more mid-end. Yeah, all with a little bit of attack, of course. So we don't get that much transient in it. Transposed a bit down and taken a filter on it. Because with it, it would sound horrible. Because it gets frequency modulated by this noise, which if we would take it out, still sounding horrible, but with the filter actually sounds like a tom, so does a lot. And as you can see, the tom doesn't always sound the same way. That is because this LFO set on random modulates this oscillator here, which in turn makes the tom sound a little bit different on each hit, because it's not always at the same position. This one is just another layer, basically similar sounds, and here the frequency of the filter gets modulated by an LFO, run through some wave shaping, took it in resonant frequency, and boosted the mids a little bit. It's just basically another layer on this tom. If we take it out, this is the one layer, and with the second, just more low end, a little bit fatter. Then let's get to the hats. We have some closed hi-hats, which I did by using noise and a little bit of square saws. You can see these are routed parallel. The noise just alone would make a perfect hi-hat. This tick 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 tick, you can hear it, but I wanted to give it some tone, so I added this square, which gives it some melodic upper tones. Then the fine of this square gets modulated. If we play it without the noise, you can hear it's always changing the pitch, and that's what makes it uneven. Then some EQing here on taking out resonant frequency, taking out all the low end. Here, what I did, I automated the gain, so the gain goes up and down, which makes it, more interesting, less boring when you're playing it in a loop. Some auto pane, same thing as the gain automation, saturation. Then we have some open hi-hats. With the open hi-hats, they sound really cymbally metallic. And what I did here, I used 2 oscillators, which are routed on top of each other, and each one of them has one other oscillator frequency modulating that with a sine wave. They have a little bit different attack times, so one is more, just sounds a little bit more taken apart. Then a filter, of course, without way too clingy, muffles it a bit and gives it less transients, just a little bit, because the highs like hit on the punch, so I took that out, a little bit less transients. And here the spread is important. Without the spread, it's really in the middle. Like this, it sounds a little bit more wide. The tone standard, without it, it would sound way too low. Then Here we just have a slight bit of reverb on it. Here's some hard EQing of the highs without it. Way too hard. Like this, more damp and less frequency content. Taking out some harsh frequencies allows me to drive it harder into the mix so I can achieve overall better loudness. Then some transient reduction by the drum bass. As you can see, it's almost like using a compressor, just bringing it up and lowering the initial transient so you can hear the body louder. Now for the claps, what I did, I used different noise oscillators. These are all routed parallel, so stacked on top of each other. And what I did here is I used different attack times for these noises. So if I deactivate them all, you can hear noise with an attack of 150 milliseconds. The second one, 116, so a bit less. So they are already a little bit apart of each other. The third one, 85, so 30 milliseconds apart again. So these three are really in time apart. And then the last one, higher pitched, also apart, creates this clap sound. Then drum bass just damps it. And I took out some volume there, saturation, and that's basically it. For the ride, sounds really metallic. How did I do this? 2 oscillators, as you can see the algorithm here. This one and this one, each getting modulated by a sine wave, frequency modulated, and they are sines each as well. Without the modulation, just the 2 sine oscillators on top. Sounds obviously really boring. First one getting frequency modulated, and the second one adding even more highs. Could actually turn this down a bit. Yeah, need it like that. So then ran it through a filter, because without the filter it sounds disgustingly high. Just took it down a bit. Then took the low end out. Compressor does nothing, it's just here we're adding some width and a parallel reverb. That's basically all. Now here we have a synth stab. Sounds very similar to the ride. I did similar processing, however I used, instead of sine waves, I used square waves. And I used a Discord plugin which makes the sound a little bit wider and a little bit more uneasy. With it, without it, just sounds more metallic, which is the goal here, to make it sound like a cymbal and not like a synth stab. The spread here is really important. Without the spread, we have a parallel delay with just a low cut and a lot of width, and on the dry we get a saturation. Here transients taken out. Yeah, just reducing the transients. And then gain staging a little bit. Here, something really interesting I did was actually splitting the signal into side and mid in the stereo space. So 2 chains, one only putting out the mid signal and one putting out the side signal. On this one you can see only the mids passing through, so I set it to mid side mode, and on the side I basically took out all the frequency contents, so only the mids remain. Then I filtered out with this one the highs, so the mids are the lows of this sound, and in the highs it's all the way to the side and nothing of the highs are in the middle. So here I did the reverse thing. I set to mid side again, but pulled out all of the mid signal. So mid is non-existent here and only the side is there. And the side I processed by only letting out the highs. So yeah, just a neat little trick that I did. Doesn't make a whole lot of a difference, but to me it was important. So let's take out the solo. Then we have some shakes. Sounds like that. And basically what I did here was just noise with an ADSR with a longer attack, because if you think about it this way, if you have a shaker, there are pellets inside, and you accelerate, these pellets start to scrub on the wall of the container. That's what makes an initial sound which rises, and then it hits the peak when all the pellets come into a stop at the side of this container, and then the sound drops. So that's why I chose the ADSR going up. So yeah, that's why it sounds like a shaker, and of course I only used noise here again. Took out the lows, a little bit of resonant. Just a little bit more dull so I can drive it harder into the mix. Then some redux to give it some grit. Yeah, just make it a little bit darker, give it some grip. Some reverb, which is getting modulated by this LFO. So yeah, we get this evolving vibe. Then here we have some claps for transitioning into new sections. For example, here we have the build-up, and I put some claps into the drop. Or here, going into the break, again, claps for changing of energy. This clap is basically two oscillators, one oscillator playing, frequency modulated by a sine, and I put some delays behind it with a parallel chain. And the interesting thing here is these clap chains will not always sound the same, because I modulated a comb filter. As you can see here, I will take off this modulation. How I did this is I took a lot of notch filters basically, or bells with high Qs, then mapped the frequency of each of these bells to one macro, so I can actually change the frequency of all of them, and that I map to this LFO, so it's always evolving, and not all of these claps sound the same. Yeah, they evolve. Then drum bass, added some transients. Now we get into the synths. Here I have a stab, which is basically sounding like this. Basically I took two single notes and then a chord stab, but reduced the velocity, so it's more or less the same volume and doesn't poke out as much if I didn't do that. Then how I did this was basically two separate oscillators, frequency modulating the one that outputs actually sound, a sine getting modulated by another sine and another sine. Without anything, sounds really boring, just this sine. With the first one, already sounds good, and this one is adding some more highs, I believe. Yeah. Then the filter here is automated for the sections. Then I have some spread here, really important. Without it, it wouldn't sound so gritty. Then these two LFOs, so this synth shot doesn't always sound the same, are modulating the levels of these two oscillators, which in turn modulate this one, which is actually outputting the sound. Because with this one we get no sound, because it's frequency modulated by these two, so the LFOs change the level, in turn change the vibe of this synth stab. Took out some resonant frequencies here, allows me to drive it, took out some of the hisses with a de-esser, another EQ, added some transients. So it really is a stab, some saturation and reverb and a delay, and that's basically it for the stab. Now let's get to the main synth. The main synth plays a melody which is then looped, this one. How did I do it? First of all, I used this trim, so it's sort of making a chord. Because without it, yeah, Sounds good, but this one gives it this really uneasy vibe, shifting up and down some notes. You can see plus 12 semitones, one here, another one an octave down, and one in between. Here we got two oscillators playing parallel on top of each other, which are in turn being frequency modulated. So this one is frequency modulating this one, this saw wave, and this one sine modulating another sine. So just the sine one, sounding like this, with the saw on top, just adding some body, because this one has a short decay and this one a longer, so it adds to the tail of the synth. Filter getting automated here in this lane, as you can see. Did this by listening to the song and then dialing it in manually with a knob on my Ableton Push, but you could do it with the mouse as well, just for a movement in the synth. An echo and a reverb on parallel chains to dry unaffected, and them mixed too. In here the echo is filtered, frequency shifted, so the echo actually sounds different than the main synth, so it gives another layer to it, you know, makes it more interesting. Some reverb like standard, and I pulled a resonancy here. Then we compressed it a little bit, make it more sticky, and here added some more saturation in the drum bass basically. And the last element is our pad, which is this one. Here I used two operator chains, one giving it some low end. This one is the high one in the high frequencies, and this one in the lows. And they are each very similar. This one transposed at 0, the second one, the deeper one, transposed at -13, not -12, to give it some more uneasiness, which is the general vibe of this entire track. Then the pad is made up of 3 parallel oscillators, each running saw waves with the same attacks, but each tuned a little bit differently. Here you see fine tuning of 80, 60 and 30, so they basically make it out of tune and sound more industrial. And the cutoff of this bandpass filter is being modulated by this LFO here, and the rate of this LFO is getting cross modulated by this second LFO. As you can see, if I turn it off, the rate is consistent, but this one is set on random and modulates this rate. Then pull the resonancy, took out the low end, frequency shifted it, just a little bit, can't hear it much, but I wanted it to be subtle, some subtle saturation with a lot of width. Then compressed the peaks of the pad, because the pad you want to be full and rich without a lot of transients. Yeah, then some reverb on 50% dry, some more crunch here in the high ends with the drum bass. This one is dampening the pad. Not sure if I like it. I might turn down the dry wet here. More like this, better. This alto filter is just moving the pad from section to section, as you can see, automated here. On the mix down here, I automated from section to section chain this here, which basically is the chain volume. Here you can see it goes up and this chain volume gets increased. Chain volume is a delay, echo and a reverb. So it basically puts more energy on the track. Notice it coming in. So these are for transitioning into new sections, as you can see here in the build up, before the break. Yeah, they basically add a lot of delay and echo and reverb. And then I took some resonating frequencies out, low end between 20 and 0 Hertz took out because that's not audible. And the very highs I took out as well. A little bit of glue compression. As you can see, some saturation. And here, this one, the ozone. Without it, the track would be really silent, peaking at about 6 dB, I believe. And with the ozone here, just pushes the track to -12 LUFS. For the arrangement, have this guideline here, a grid and a phase. For the phrase, I basically named it, so this is the mix in for mixing in the club. Evolving to introducing, this is a section where I add elements, as you can see here. Some of the claps get added and the open hi-hats, and here the shakers. And then we get into the full section. This is basically where the whole full track plays. Then we're slowly taking out elements again, decreasing the energy. Here basically everything gets taken out. In the break, the pad plays, the synths, and I have these synth stabs coming in. Then for the next one, we have the build-up, a lot of energy building, the low end filtered out. We have closed hi-hats coming in, the open ones, clap, transition clap segments and the synths. And then we get into the drop, and then the elements at the climax play all at once. Decrease to out, where we take out again some elements, and then to the out is just a monotone kick and a little bit of pad, which then get high pass filtered to mix it out. That was basically my project. I hope you can take away something from this video, learn something. If you're